About 4 years and 1 month ago, we first heard of the existence of God Valley and the Rocks Pirates, and then 139 chapters later, we not only got introduced to what exactly the Celestial Dragons were doing on that island, but we actually got to see those Rocks Pirates in action within chapter 1096. This is one of the most important events that we're aware of in modern One Piece history, and while I'm a little sad Oda didn't actually show us Rocks D. Zebek himself, this event is still clearly living up to the hype. I mean, seeing Whitebeard, Big Mom, Kaido, Shiki, Miss Buckingham, Stussy, Captain John, and who are likely Silver Axe and Wang Zhi all working together, or at least kind of, is just insane to see. But the one that kind of stands out to me the most is Gloriosa, or who we now know as Elder Neon, the Empress of Amazon Lily from a few generations ago. This is a pretty welcome surprise because we did not know that she was a part of Rocks whatsoever. I mean, some may have theorized it here or there, but this is legitimately a new reveal. And not only does this build the importance of Amazon Lily even more, which is something we've seen somewhat recently with Blackbeard attacking that island for Boa's fruit, but it also resurrected the idea that Gloriosa could be Yamato's mom, or at the very least, Gloriosa might be this face that Higurashi turned into earlier in Wano. The running thought on this for a while now has been that this was Miss Buckingham Stussy, but I think that's clearly not the case now that we see a young Stussy who looks quite a bit different. And I think Higurashi looked a lot closer to Gloriosa now that we see a younger version of her, and I think that's pretty interesting. And a lot of you guys have probably also picked up on the fact that two of these Rocks pirates look like two of the zombie generals from Thriller Bark. And the fact that they apparently went up against the God's Knights at God Valley has me pretty hyped, because I dropped a whole video tying the zombie generals to the God's Knights a few months ago, so I'll leave a link to that down below. But the main thing that I want to talk about right now is that this pirate is definitely Captain John. I think that's pretty obvious, but I think this one has to be Silver Axe, which is very ironic, and I'll explain why in just a moment. But this one in the corner almost has to be Wang Zhi, or Ochoku. And the reason why is that going into this chapter, we knew of 9 total Rocks pirates, including Rocks himself, and now with Gloriosa as part of the crew, we now have 10 confirmed members. And on this panel, Oda gave us 9 faces among the Rocks crew, only missing Rocks D. Zebek himself. So I think it's pretty safe to assume that these are like the 9 main members of the crew, and they're probably the same 9 member that Oda has already named for us. And that fits pretty nicely to Luffy, who has 9 crew members right now, even though he does say he wants 10, but still. So given we have 9 faces here and 9 names to match them with, I think it's safe to say that the names we're already aware of are going to fit into each of these. So most of them are pretty obvious, but Ochoku and Silver Axe were the only 2 that we didn't have designs for already. And since this guy at the top here was a zombie during Thriller Bark, it can't be Ochoku because he was alive at that time, and presumably still is alive today after Blackbeard took Hachinosu from him during the Rocky Port incident. And what's ironic about this guy being Silver Axe is he doesn't use an axe, nor does he wear anything silver. He wears gold armor and uses a sword. I mean, if you looked at this panel of the zombie generals, you would think that this guy is Silver Axe since he's wearing silver armor and actually has an axe, but given that we saw this face in this flashback and then we saw this zombie that looks very much like it, I think that has to be Silver Axe. Now I really like this idea from Kush Daddy over in the Discord, where basically axe is slang for guitar, and they're called the Rocks Pirates, which could maybe mean like rock and roll, so maybe Silver Axe was given that epithet because he plays a silver guitar, which we don't actually see here. And I feel like that's pretty on brand for Oda to name a guy Silver Axe and not have him wear silver or use an axe, but then come up with some other roundabout way to make that work. And another on-brand thing for Oda is to include little details in the back of the panel, like this one that Face Vincor sent me, where Strusen, the king of sus in my opinion, is even found in the background of this panel. And this tracks because he was the first member of the Big Mom Pirates, teaming up with Linlin right after she ate the children, and to see him make his way in this panel with the other Rocks Pirates is just kind of crazy. Like, what a glow up for that guy. But now I want to talk about Ochoku a little bit, because if this is him down in the corner, then Oda might be making a really deep cut here in regards to X Drake. It's obviously a little hard to tell here, but even when I first glanced at this image, I thought that looked like Drake a lot, and I still think it does. And that kind of tracks because Drake and Kobe are deeply connected, and Kobe was the hero of Rocky Port, where Ochoku lost his territory of Hachinosu. There's also this whole thing of Drake playing on both sides, kind of being a part of the Marines and pirate crews both, and I think Hachinosu is kind of a representation of that because turning Pirate Island into a government-recognized island is Blackbeard's goal now that he took it over. Now, I don't think that's Blackbeard's entire goal, but he did say it at least. So that's already kind of tying the pirate world and government affiliation together a little bit. Also, Drake's dad is the one who found the Op fruit, and Blackbeard just beat Law and almost took his fruit. Plus, Law was also involved in the Rocky Port incident, thus tying all of these things together even more. And based off what we know right now, Ochoku is presumed alive alive, because in One Piece, if there's no body, there's no death. And even if there is a body, there's no death sometimes. Looking at you, Kinemon. So Oda always finds a way to not kill people. So I think Ochoku's still going to be alive, so he will come back into the story at some point, and when he does, that is going to make for some insane lore drops, given that he was here at God Valley and held Hachinosu for all those years as well. So now I want to talk about one of the biggest mysteries from the chapter, which I think everyone's been talking about, which is the crown jewel of Pirate Island. This is something that the government took from Hachinosu and thus made the Rocks Pirates kind of respond to get that item back at God Valley. So I've heard a lot of good ideas about this, and I don't even think I can really include every single one in this video, so I'm just going to pick kind of the most likely ones to me and talk about those. Because for something to not only be valuable enough for the government to take it from the Beehive, but also for the Rocks Pirates to respond and take on the Celestial Dragons and God's Knights to get it back, it would just have to be something insanely important. So the first and most simple option to me is Kaido's Azure Dragon Fruit. And this is kind of the Occam's Razor example, I think, because if you go back to this big spread with all the Rocks Pirates, some of them are kind of talking about getting their hands on an item. Shiki says Finders Keepers, Captain John says my precious treasure, which we'll talk about more in just a second, but also Big Mom says it'll be all mine, and then Kaido responds with it would be pointless in your hands, Lin Lin. The fact that Kaido responded like that makes me believe Big Mom is talking about a devil fruit, since she already has one and thus she can't eat another, and that's why it would be useless in her hands. And given that she darted right for that fruit when they got to the island and took it from Ivankov, I think it's safe to assume that fruit is what Big Mom was talking about in that panel. And since there's a few other comments from the other pirates implying they're all kind of chasing the same thing, it makes me think that fruit would just be the crown jewel because they're all talking about it. Or at least it seems that way. And on the surface, that might seem like too simple of an answer, but I think this could be a really deep cut into Kaido's respect and admiration for Rocks. Because it does seem that he looks up to him, and if he was able to eat the fruit that his captain considered the crown jewel of Pirate Island, maybe he kind of felt like he owed it to his captain to live out his dream, which may very well be tied to finding the true Joy Boy or something, because I'm sure Rocks knew a lot about the true history of the world somehow. Maybe Kaido wanted to be the strongest creature alive on purpose because that would force Joy Boy to return and take him down. And maybe that's something Rocks knew about a long time ago and Kaido was kind of able to live out for him. But I get that answer might seem kind of simple, so if that's not it, let's stick with the devil fruit theme, because again, based off Big Mom and Kaido's dialogue, it seems they would be discussing a devil fruit. So what if it's Luffy's fruit? This is something that 3Day brought up during my live stream, and I love this idea because maybe Rocks already had a different fruit and thus couldn't eat this supposed god fruit, so he kept it to essentially draw Joy Boy out of hiding. Basically what I just said for Kaido, where he may have become so strong to force Joy Boy to return, essentially, maybe Rocks was doing the same thing, but by holding the fruit hostage. If Joy Boy can only return because of that fruit, if he just keeps the fruit there, then he would eventually get to meet Joy Boy, which seems kind of like what Kaido wanted to do a little bit. And I mean, to be fair, this fruit would definitely be important enough for the government to steal, and it would also just kind of make sense because of how important Luffy's fruit has become in the endgame. Also, the first time we heard about this crown jewel of Pirate Island, it was during a discussion with Kong and Monkey D. Garp, two people with monkey-esque names just like Luffy. So for that discussion to be revolving around the fruit that Monkey D. Luffy would eventually eat just kind of makes sense, I think. But then another great idea is from Saran Wrap, and that's that the crown jewel was a road poneglyph, and maybe the road poneglyph that Big Mom has held onto for so long. This would explain how she got one, which is a mystery in and of itself, and it's another thing that would definitely be important enough for the government to want their hands on, and also for the Rocks Pirates to try to get back. Also, this could build a paradigm where Kaido got the dragon fruit, but in return, maybe he let Big Mom take the poneglyph. Like he could have said, listen, you're not getting both of these things. The fruit is useless with you, so let me have that, but then you can take the poneglyph instead. That would be a really good way to tie things together, I think. Because obviously Big Mom did want that fruit, but if that's not the crown jewel, and the crown jewel is the road poneglyph, then I can see them kind of evening it out and saying, like, you get one, I get the other. But then another option that is probably one of the most popular ones that I've heard about is just Captain John's treasure. This one also makes sense because, as Tiny Angry Gnome pointed out in the Discord, Captain John does say my precious treasure in this panel. I mean, Captain John's treasure is another important treasure in One Piece that we really don't know a whole lot about, so it does kind of make sense on the surface. And Buggy supposedly found its resting place on an island with a skull, somewhat like Hachinosu, and maybe even somewhat like Onigashima if you really think about it. These Rocks Pirates really love their skull-shaped islands, that's for sure. So taking the treasure from one skull island, being Hachinosu, and then leaving it at another skull island, which is the one we saw Buggy at, would kind of make sense thematically. But at the same time, I think this being Captain John's treasure would also be really confusing because the thing we know of as Captain John's treasure probably wasn't called that until well after his death. I mean, even in this chapter, they call it the crown jewel of Pirate Island. So something major would have had to happen later for this to be called Captain John's treasure in the future like it is today. So I kind of go back and forth on how likely this thing is. Now, there's no doubt that this line is foreshadowing for the treasure. I mean, he specifically said my treasure, so I think Oda wants us to think that. But it may be more so a subtle reminder that there is a mystery about this treasure that we still need, not that the crown jewel is actually the treasure. Because there's also this SBS where Oda basically tells us that Captain John was stabbed by his own crew for trying to keep that treasure for himself. And I mean, every Rocks pirate's basically saying they want it for themselves, so I think the story that Oda told us in the SBS is something that happened later on. Because after God Valley, the Rocks pirates basically dissolved and everyone started their own crews. I mean, we know Big Mom went out and started her own crew, we know Kaido did the same, Shiki, etc. So Captain John doing the same thing kinda makes sense. So I think just like the other Rocks pirates, Captain John probably went out on his own adventures after this happened, and then that's when he got the treasure, and then he got stabbed by that crew later on. So the Captain John's treasure thing happened after this, but Oda's maybe foreshadowing it a little bit with that line. I don't know if that made sense, it was kind of confusing. Basically, I think it would line up better if the treasure was just something else later on. But now, what would that treasure be? I have no idea. I feel like an eternal pose, or a map, or maybe a Rosetta Stone for poneglyphs, or something in that realm of things would make sense, but Oda's probably not going to go that route and he's going to do something really unexpected, so I have no idea. But another option for this crown jewel is Uranus, or the egg that Roger had on his ship, which many believe to be Uranus. Because going back to the Ed War, we saw Shiki claim that Roger knew the location of an ancient weapon, and that one is most likely Uranus just because he hadn't met Odin yet to read the poneglyph that would have discussed Poseidon's location, or to potentially learn about Pluton, which is underneath Wano. Uranus is kind of the odd one out in that regard, and since Shiki was a Rocks pirate, it would kind of all connect. It also tracks well because of Ivankov. Eva was the one to mention that the Mother Flame could be an ancient weapon based off its power, and obviously Eva was here at God Valley, and we know that today, God Valley was supposedly erased. So perhaps Uranus was responsible for that erasure back in the day, and then Roger took the egg with him afterwards somehow. Maybe after Uranus was used, it reverted back to an egg for some time period, and maybe that's why Shiki didn't immediately know the egg was Uranus because he was used to it looking like something else. I mean, I and many people theorize that Uranus will eventually be a dragon of some sort, one that ties to the Shandora snakes, which then also shares similarities with Kaido's dragon form anyway. Since they're both blue, they both are technically sea snake-like things since Kaido's fruit's a fish-fish model, and the Shandora snakes were seen residing in water. So going back to the point earlier about Kaido's fruit making the most sense here for the crown jewel, it could be that that answer also ties to Uranus because maybe they thought that fruit and Uranus were connected. Like maybe that fruit lets you be the thing that Uranus also is, or something like that. Kind of like how the Shandians were convinced that a blue snake was tied to the sun god, maybe the Rocks pirates tied the Azure dragon to Joy Boy or something, which could be from the same legend that King knew about, which made him think Kaido had to be Joy Boy. There's some connection there for sure, I don't know what it is. But one last idea that I heard quite a few times is that it was the giant straw hat that we now know is in Marijua. And this is one that I really doubt, because first off, I think that hat is pretty clearly an Emu and Joy Boy type connection, like Emu's had it for a very long time since Joy Boy's time or something. So for the Rocks pirates to ever have it at any point means they likely would have had to take it from Marijua first, which means they likely would have known about its importance first, and all of that kind of opens up a big can of worms that I don't think Oda's just going to pursue. There's also the question of, if they had that straw hat there as the crown jewel, why would the Marines or world government take it back to God Valley? Why wouldn't they rush it back to Marijua where obviously Emu wanted it, right? If Emu's going to put it in a freezer and keep it hidden away from everyone, then I don't think they would go take it to God Valley and leave it in harm's way, right? I mean, that's way out in the West Blue. But I do think there's a connection somehow between the hat and also the crown jewel, because we know that Doflamingo called that hat the national treasure of Marijua, which is the same type of vibe that we're seeing here with the crown jewel of Pirate Island, and I don't think they're one and the same, but maybe they're equally important in some way. And in fact, that makes me think that Luffy's fruit being the crown jewel is even more likely, kind of tying these layers together. But then again, why would they take Luffy's fruit over to God Valley? It's kind of the same argument. So overall, I think Kaido's fruit is the easiest answer, and that there's a tie to Uranus there somehow, but the fact that the hat is the national treasure is interesting. So now I want to talk a little bit more about Ivankov, because I've always respected Ivankov, I've appreciated Ivankov, but all of that went to entirely new heights after this chapter. Ivankov and Guinea are like the main reasons that God Valley even happened the way we we know it. Guinea released that info to the outside world a couple weeks prior, so then everyone knew to show up, and Ivankov rallied the troops, including Kuma, which led to them staying alive as well as 500 others from the island. I mean, there was probably nobody that ever theorized Ivankov was one bite away from eating the dragon fruit, nor that Big Mom would have been the one to stop Ivankov from doing so. That's just the type of crazy connection that makes One Piece as amazing as it is. And I love this comment from Matthew Leader saying, "I'd love to see drawings of Eva with the dragon fruit and likewise Kaido with the hormone fruit in an SBS. That's like 100% something Oda would draw for us, or at the very minimum, something that people would ask of Oda to draw for us in an SBS, so I would not be surprised at all if we see that happen." And then also in this one panel, we see Ivankov gets freed because of a shark fishman biting the chains off, and Ivankov remarks how it's no surprise for a fishman like you. And then the guy even says, "I've never been praised like this before." This hits home really hard because we've seen two other important shark fishmen before who unfortunately know very well about the slavery fishmen have had to face, and that's Jinbei and Arlong. Jinbei is a whale shark fishman, and Arlong is a saw shark fishman. Now, I'm not saying this dude is related to either of them because fishman genes don't really work that way anyway, but I do think Oda's kind of rekindling our awareness of how bad the fishmen have had it. And he's doing so with yet another shark fishman, because Arlong and Jinbei are probably the two closest connections to Fisher Tiger, and Fisher Tiger is probably the fishman who has the closest ties to this whole slavery thing since he freed those slaves, right? I mean, even in this panel, we see a shark fishman freeing a human slave, so I think we can read into that a little bit too, because the fishmen giving blood to humans has kind of been a point of contention. So while giving blood and freeing the slaves is a little bit different, maybe there's a little bit of a through line there for us to read into. And also, when Ivankov was kind of explaining how the game works to the other slaves, Oda drew that as if it was happening in Ivankov's afro. This is something that Oda's done a million times, with Sengoku's afro when talking about God Valley, within Gaimon's afro when discussing his flashback, within Brook's afro several times honestly, and some other examples as well. To me, this is just more proof that the One Piece is an afro, and we will one day get the Void Century flashback within that very afro. But we'll see. Check this video out if you have no idea what I'm talking about. But let's give Kuma his shine now, because he deserves it. This man literally offered himself up to get that pawpaw fruit, not because he really wanted those powers or anything, but because he recognized that he was bigger and bulkier than everyone else, and that would probably help him survive longer than the rest of them. Oda is setting up Kuma to be like the most selfless person in the story, truly a man for the people, and while this flashback is a gut-wrencher, it only makes me more nervous for the truth behind his mechanization. Did he offer to become a robot for similar reasons? Was it another selfless act like this? Were those experiments all a part of his self-sacrificial nature? We don't know all that much about the Buccaneers just yet, but going back to last chapter, there does seem to be something up with their blood. So perhaps Kuma recognized how much he could help the world by being experimented on, but the only way Vegapunk could take advantage of that is by also using him for the world government's purposes, because they are funding Vegapunk. And we also saw a few chapters ago that it seems like Saturn is the one who made the call to make Kuma go full robot, or at least he's the one who ordered it to Vegapunk. And not only is Saturn at Egghead right now, where Kuma may be showing up too soon, but Saturn was also at God Valley, and even kinda cooked Kuma here. We saw a pretty similar attack to what we've seen recently in Egghead, and we even got some of this black fire stuff in the background. So the fact that Oda had Saturn at God Valley out of all the Gorosei, or at least the ones he's shown us, is insane. When Kuma pulls up to Egghead later, they're gonna have a crazy talk, because we even see in this chapter, Kuma's basically talking back to him as a child, but not even in a shit-talking kind of way, but Kuma's just being himself, asking why Saturn is so important, why anyone has to be born a slave, and how if he has some kind of power, he's going to save as many people as he can, just like Nika. That line was one of the coldest in this entire chapter, because you know Saturn was pissed when he heard that name. And I bet during Egghead a similar thing is gonna happen, except Nika will actually be there in the form of Luffy. Now, Luffy is kind of out of it right now, but maybe Kuma pushes out his pain one more time so Luffy can use Gear 5th again, being kind of a final hurrah where Kuma gets to see Nika before his probable eventual demise, because he's kind of on his last legs as we speak. I mean, he just lost half of his face. But Saturn also mentioned how that was precisely why his people needed to be erased, which kind of ties the Buccaneers and Nika or Joy Boy together pretty closely. And that's something I think we already kind of knew about the Lunarians, because they were also wiped out, but King knew about the legends of Joy Boy somehow. And on the flip side, the Buccaneers know about Sun God Nika. What is Joy Boy's connection with these races that have led to the legends being passed down? And is that the real real reason these races are being erased, or is there something else to it? I mean, obviously Lunarians and Buccaneers are very powerful, but there are other powerful races too, like the Giants over on Elbaf. Why isn't the government going after them? The Fishmen are even kinda similar, and sure, they've been enslaved quite a bit, but why let Fishman Island and potentially Poseidon exist when they clearly have history with Joy Boy too? Even the Samurai and Wano fill a similar role because while Samurai aren't really a biological race of people like the others are, the fact they are so powerful caused Akainu to act with caution when deciding what to do with them. And obviously Wano has tons of history with Joy Boy in the Ancient Kingdom, so why aren't they being wiped out the same way? Well, I think the answer is just that there's something particularly special with these other races, something that almost worries the Gorosei or Emu. Maybe it ties to their lineage factor, maybe something with their inherited will because of the race that they're from. I'm not really sure exactly what's going on here, but the government themselves have wanted to gigantify people for a while now, so clearly they have a vested interest in different races for some selfish reason. And I'm just curious why they treat some so differently than others. Some get wiped out entirely, some don't, some get experimented on. What is the rhyme or reason between all of this? But I also want to talk for just a moment about these other people with Garling who could very well be other gods' knights. One said they were from the Manmeyer family, which is a brand new celestial dragon family, which is pretty cool, but we also got glimpses of a few others. The one with the mask looks a lot like this kid from the House of Lambs in Big Mom's flashback, which could be a really deep cut given Big Mom is also at God Valley, but these other two are totally new designs. I think it's safe to assume the Manmeyer family one is a god's knight because we got a whole family name for them, but I'm not really sure what to make of these other faces, or these people behind Garling in this other panel. There seems to be a lot of celestial dragons who are participating in this cleansing game, so it's hard for me to say if Oda would actually reveal new God's Knights in small panels like this or not. But either way, they will definitely be relevant going forward once we get back to this flashback, which may or may not be next chapter. Honestly, I feel like Oda's probably done with this flashback for now, but we'll tap back into it later whenever we really get into rocks, because if he didn't reveal rocks here, he's saving it for a reason, so that'll probably come back into play later on. Maybe once Kuma shows up and talks to Saturn? I'm not really sure. But that's it for this video, guys. Please make sure to drop a like, hit subscribe, and then maybe even check out these other videos from the main channel if you haven't already. But until next time, later.